My name is Annabelle Gawer. I'm an academic. I wasn't always an academic. I worked in telecom for a number of years as an engineer before going back to school. And I see there is an MIT connection here. Jeff from MIT and Peter from MIT and myself and my PhD supervisor is in the room, Michael Cusumano. Michael, yes, and I'd like to give credit where credit is due. I wouldn't be here without Michael today, and he and I wrote my first book based on my PhD thesis called Platform Leadership, and that was a thesis I started in the mid-90s at MIT, and we published that at Harvard Business School Press in 2002. What are platforms and how do they create value? We haven't heard the word network effects this morning yet. Who knows what that means? Could you raise your hands? Okay, so half of you do. Okay, let me try to make it simple. Platforms are engines of economic growth. Why is that? Because they facilitate transactions and interconnections between a large number of individuals and a large number of organizations. They do that in a way where the advantages of yesterday becomes multiplied the more users join the platforms. The more users join the platforms, or the more organizations join the platform, the more benefit the new user get than before. So if you're one of the first few users, you get some benefit. It's a bit like a telecom network. You're one of the first two people who have a telephone on a desert island. It's great, but you can only speak to two people. But if there are 1,000 people on that island and you're the 1,001st user, you can connect with another 1,000 people. You didn't pay more for buying your phone connection, but the value you get from being connected to that network is much greater. Okay? So what we have here in simple economic terms is a situation where market share itself creates value. If you were successful in the past, if you have a large installed base, a large number of users, a large number of developers of games on your platforms, a large number of friends on Facebook, the new ones who come in are going to benefit increasingly compared to the first ones. Okay, so there is here an acceleration mechanism. You can call it acceleration, you can call it momentum, you can call it network effect. The important idea here is that you have increasing returns. Okay, we now see another kind of increasing returns, which have to do with these network effects. And that's going to increase, and that's going to explain the fundamental change that we see in the economic landscape. Yeah, one of the distinctions that I've made, and which I think is quite helpful, is this distinction between transaction platforms and innovation platforms. Right? So we understand that transaction platforms are, think about eBay, think about Amazon Marketplace, lots of users on the one hand, lots of sellers on the other. The platform is in the middle, helps these guys connect to these guys because otherwise they wouldn't even know where they are. So it helps reduce the cost of finding each other, makes the transaction itself much easier. And with these network effects, everybody's happy and it keeps growing and growing. That's a transaction platform, we understand that. So yes, so the transaction platforms, the innovation platform, the integrated are those who are making both. So you see a company like Uber, which is a transaction platform, they have APIs now, right? So the API is sort of a really good way to facilitate and entice external innovators to add complementary services, software-based services on top of your platform. And then, the investment platform, that was not on my radar screen at all. Peter really made a really interesting take there, and you see that all over the world, these investment platforms are making quite a big impact. So the functions are matching, the interaction, complementary innovation, and building these ecosystems. I use the word ecosystem very similarly to the way Simon Torrance said at BearingPoint. Platforms are interesting because of the platform-based ecosystems that they are powering. And we used to teach to MBA students about competition by saying, competition between firm A and firm B. That's what you need to understand. Firm A and firm B. Not what we see with this platform competition is coalition of firm A, which is the ecosystem around platform A, competing with coalition around firm B. So the ecosystem centered on platform B. the companies who are successful in this new game not only have to know how to compete, but they also have to be able to become the captains of their own ecosystem. Like the captain of an industry, the captain of a football team. They have to sustain collaborative ecosystems to provide and continue to provide incentives for the developers of complementary services and applications to remain, guess what, on their platform as opposed to on the other platform. So it creates specific challenges about how to manage such companies. Trying to understand why in Europe we're lagging behind and what could be done to invert that. There's a lot of collective intelligence in this room. So I would be really interested in us having a more open discussion about this. So what are the concerns? Let's try to unpack it a bit. Tax avoidance. So some of these US companies, not only they're incredibly rich, we provide a lot of money through our consuming of these goods, and they don't even pay their taxes. That riles people. Tax avoidance. Antitrust. These companies are very, very dominant now. You know, IBM was dominant, slammed an antitrust suit on it. Microsoft was dominant, we slammed an antitrust suit on it. Not just us, in the US as well, Department of Justice. Google, Facebook are becoming very, very dominant, big antitrust scrutiny. Yeah? Is it unfair competition? And here I would like to say something. We all have heard about Schumpeter and creative destruction, right? We all understand that sometimes when you have big radical technological change, the winners of yesterday are not guaranteed lifetime earnings in the next phase. We understand that there are some fundamental changes that are going to weaken the previous incumbents. Now, it is completely understandable that the incumbents of the old system, for example, I don't know, the French taxi drivers, are not going to welcome with open arm Uber. We would not expect them to react otherwise. Their business model is fundamentally threatened by a service which provides similar or better service for a fraction of the price. Does that mean it's unfair? Does that mean society should intervene and say this is really, really, really wrong, right? And one of the difficulty when one is a regulator, and I'm not a regulator, and I'm happy I'm not a regulator, is, you know, do we want to protect existing jobs, which is important, or do we want the consumer to be better off because they're going to get cheaper services for a cheaper price? And how do you make that trade-off? Now, in Europe, we don't just want to consume lots of cheap IT from China and cheap digital stuff from America. And then what do? Where does our money generating capacity come from, right? On the other hand, clinging to old models, which on a global scale are doomed, is probably not the way to save Europe from problems, right? So the question might not necessarily be, we've got to protect our way of life. I think it's great to protect our way of life. Protecting, and I have nothing against French taxi drivers, but protecting overpriced French taxi drivers might not be the best way to achieve what we want. Yeah? So I'm trying to say we need to have a balanced view here because there are differing perspectives, and these are very contested areas where there are different interests at stake and not all the interests align. As you were saying, Peter, platforms are a global market and not just a European market. So I was speaking with Ludwig Siegele from The Economist here just at the break. And he was telling me that, you know, about 100 years ago, we had the railroads, when we started to have those infrastructures, railroads, electricity, water, they became utilities. Yeah? And they didn't start up as regulated utilities. They started up with private entrepreneurs. Then society realized we want these to become infrastructure on which, you know, there is a social contract with individuals. We provide access to clean water and electricity in every home. Politicians get elected on that type of promise or platform. Yeah? So we have now a new infrastructure, this internet. We have an infrastructure with data. We as individuals consume it and benefit from it. And it permeates our daily lives. We also contribute to it by the data that we give on a continuous basis, feeding it back into this infrastructure. But this is a global infrastructure, right? And so When an infrastructure was national and you had national regulation to say this is how the electricity network is going to be regulated within the country, this is what happened. We are now in a situation, we have global platforms, we have global players, we have questions that need to be discussed, not just and decided not just by the private companies whose interest it is to grow their own platform, but to represent citizens' voices. It's not entirely clear how to regulate or not regulate, and to do that. Do we want a world ministry of data? That sounds really creepy, yeah? Do we want all the data in the world, in the nightmare fantasies, to be, dealt with Google and Facebook, who, using our data behind our back to do all sorts of evil things? Again, let's not become paranoid about these things. But there is a discrepancy between the governance of the regulation and the global market. Yeah. So what's the right platform strategy for Europe? When I teach strategy, okay? And when I teach strategy, I tell the executives that I teach to, or the MBAs, think about the way you can create value in a way that's unique to you, so you can create a competitive advantage. Right? So what is it, what resources, what sources of competitive advantage should Europe tap into? What are we going to create? How are we going to tap into the industrial infrastructure we have, the consumers that we have, the educated workforce that we have, to create value in a way that's unique and different, adopting these platform business models that will generate value coming from Europe in a competition that is global?
Thank you very much. Should we say thanks to Annabelle? Thank you.